volatile and unclear requirements. So when the customer changes its mind and, one day he says
Yeah.
A, the next day he says B, how have you experienced as a coach or as a developer, how did volatile or the unclear requirements affect the value that the team had delivered?
No, it's a good place to start. So when we talk about requirements aren't really an agile word as such. So, but I would probably in the last few weeks talked about requirements more than once, and I try to keep away from them as much as possible. We have a thing called the BRS, business requirement specification. These things are waterfall documents. They're not agile documents. So the reason why you might have one is because you're working within an environment where they still want to run projects in a waterfall way. And it's still very, very common, but they want their technology team to run agile, which normally means Scrum, right? But let's just keep away from that for a minute or two. Requirements I'm going to separate the whole organizations into business and tech for the sake of argument, right? Requirements always exist because the business wants particular things and they want tech to deliver them. What we try to push the business to talk about is what's their expectations of the software. What do they want it to do? And we constantly try and do that. So anyone who's experiencing agile and agile delivery, or even just good quality delivery, even if you work in waterfall, tries not to get the customer or the user to say, I want A or I want B. I want red or I want black. We try to stay away from that. We try to say, what is it you actually want this to do? And if they say we want to use it in the dark, we'll go, well, you don't want a black one then. But let us decide that because we're the experts in this stuff. So we always try and guide the users to be, hey, let us focus on the expectations. Now, when you don't do that and you focus on requirements, so if they say that's got to be black, that's got to be, then your scope is fixed. The moment you do that, you fix your scope. And at that point, you have no agility. The whole options of agile just go out the window because once you fixed your scope, the only thing you can lose is some of those requirements, and that doesn't then marry up with what the customer wants. If they were to change their mind and say red to black, yes, we would hope to be able to address that. But in all honesty, if you're running in an agile environment anyway, you would never have asked the question red or black. You'd have asked what the expectation is. And that's quite mature agile. For all the environments I'm in, teams who stay away from requirements and focus on expectations are probably towards the B's to A's. They're getting good grades for their agile. Most of the agile teams still work around requirements. They still gather the requirements before they start, and they still try and hit the requirements on the head. And quite often, the reason the customer changes their mind is because they were wrong. They didn't want a black one. Doesn't work in the dark because they weren't the experts to make the decisions in the first place. What we try and do is say, tell us what you're going to use it for. We're the experts in the software. We'll decide the color of it. I've used that analogy a bit too much now.
No, that already points to my second question, which would go into the solutions that you've implemented. So you don't focus on the actual requirements, but you would use an expectation-based approach and then let the team decide how they would turn that into a requirement or what should be delivered.
So I've worked in a number of different organizations, the bigger ones. I won't ask you where you worked in SAP, but if you're using SAP, it was a big organization, right? I'd assume, because it's not cheap. So bigger organizations struggle a lot to do that because they want predictability. So they want to lock their scope in. So you will have a lot more of exactly what am I getting for that cost. But that's one of the things that we would always try and do. We try and say, look, we want to keep our agility. And one of the techniques in doing that is if you're using systems like Jira and those, you progressively elaborate before you get to the task. Because the task is the final. We need you to paint this red. We need you to paint this black. That's the task. But all the way before that, you start with the bigger things, the epics, or even an initiative. If you can really progressively elaborate that, then you're probably going down the right path of having that agility because you're giving the customer, whether it be the business or the users, you're giving them a seat at the table to talk about stuff and to progress, stay with you throughout the process as it gets to the task. But quite often the big organizations, they don't want to do that. There's one of the agile principles around business people and technology working together. That's not easy. That's not easy to get those teams where they are truly cross-functional. It tends to be tech teams as techs and the business, and they do have that. I don't know in in Europe and Germany in particular, whether there's still that big division in organizations, the business,
Oh,
tech.
it's a silos
Yeah.
environment. There's
Yeah,
a big difference between and getting that, let's say, gap fixed. We never managed to do that at SAP back in the day.